Hello again, I'm Stephen Wells, the host of the Motoring Weekly podcast for the Australian Historic Road and Racing community, and we're now at episode 174. This is the third interview regarding the Royal Flying Doctor Service Outback Car Trek. Episode 170 was an interview with the head of motoring events for the Royal Flying Doctor Service South Eastern section, and that was Matthew Tossolini. I followed that with an interview with two long-term trekkers, Matt Vichy and Josh Graham, in episode 172, where I learnt about the vehicles that they have used and they've built for the conditions. Now it's the turn of a medic. As you would expect, the Royal Flying Doctor provides medical support for the crews who take part in the Outback Car Trek, considering they are travelling through some fairly harsh and remote countryside. This year, one of the doctors selected for the event was Dr Guy Hardwick, a young British expat who had the experience of a lifetime with the teams. He describes his work with the Flying Doctors and his off-road experiences in the Middle East, and then being part of the support crew working their way through parts of Australia that most of us have never heard of. So here's the interview with Dr Hardwick. I'm now with Dr Guy Hardwick from the Royal Flying Doctor Service, the third interview about the Outback Car Trek, because Dr. Hardwick was on the trek this year in a medical capacity, being the Royal Flying Doctor Service going out into the Outback. I'd like to start with you, so welcome, Dr. Hardwick, to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
That's okay. Let's start along with how long have you been with the Flying Doctor Service?
I've been in Australia working for the RFDS for just over a year now.
Okay, and what was your background?
So I came from an anaesthesia medical background in the UK, and I had completed my early junior doctor training, got into my anaesthetic training, and done about half the training programme out there before coming out to work for the RFDS. Okay, and whereabouts in the UK? So I grew up in Cambridge, and then I went to Norwich, the University of East Anglia, for my medical training, and I stayed in that area for my doctor training, postgraduate, and junior doctor years in anaesthesia after that.
Yeah, I used to have clients in March.
Really?
Who were actually a Melbourne-based company, and that was one of the reasons why I came out to Australia, was to help build a business based on the fact that they were one of our biggest clients, and they needed looking after down here. So what's your normal role with the Flying Doctor Service?
So my title with the RFDS is as a retrieval registrar, which means that my primary job is to be available when I'm on shift for emergency retrieval work. We also do a very large amount of telehealth medicine when we work in the far west. As you've mentioned before earlier, we have sites in the southeastern section in Dubbo and in Broken Hill. In Broken Hill, we cover the far west of the state, so we do lots of the telehealth medicine for the small nurse-led emergency departments in that area as well.
Okay. Does your work actually mean you're on the planes, or are you more ground-based?
So my primary role is on the planes, doing the retrieval jobs, emergency retrieval from remote locations.
And whereabouts are you based?
So my official basing is in Dubbo. And we also work, as I say, out of Broken Hill. So roughly once a month to once every 6 weeks, we will rotate into Broken Hill and do a week to 10 days or so in Broken Hill. There are a couple of our doctors that are based permanently in Broken Hill as well. But that's the usual state of things. We rotate in and out.
Right. And when you came out, did you hear about the role in the UK, or did you come out and then snag it when you got out here?
I heard about it in the UK. I had a friend of a friend who had heard I was looking at going to Australia. They mentioned that they had flown out to do the RFDS job themselves, And off the back of that, I looked into the organisation and contacted them and got an interview, and then here I am. So
Good.
I actually was given a huge amount of support by the RFDS to come out to Australia and do the job out here. So they've been really, really very supportive from that perspective.
There is, from memory, there is quite a large supporter base in the UK. From a donations and other perspectives, they are quite well known up in the UK with expats, and then people like us who've heard about them and are quite enthused by what they do.
Yeah, my mum's one of those donors now as well.
Good. It happens, doesn't it, that your family get involved?
Yeah.
So in your profile of those video, you talked briefly about doing long-distance off-road driving experiences in the past. What did they consist of?
The main one that I've done is one of the best holidays I've ever been on, which is two friends of mine back home, and I organised a four-wheel drive touring trip around Oman. Okay. And two of the really attractive aspects of it were that there are no land-based predators in Oman, and you're legally allowed to camp anywhere that isn't private land. Right. So we hired a 4x4. We looked into the off-road driving routes around Oman, and there are some just incredible Middle Eastern desert landscapes there that you can go and visit in a really safe capacity. The people are really friendly, and we did, for instance, a 2-day trek across the Wahiba Sands Desert, which was just on the edge of being challenging, but also safe. So we had to sort of test yourself and your skills driving off-road on sand, sort of almost for the first time, really. We discovered quite quickly the value of partially deflating your tires, otherwise you can't get anywhere. Digging a car out of the sand, that sort of thing. It kind of felt like a mini Top Gear episode, but we were just doing ourselves. And so the total trip was about a week, 10 days, and we off-roaded and camped around the place. It was absolutely fantastic. Yeah,
I think those kind of trips are very good understanding how other things work in the world, because going to a completely different environment, you might do a bit of beach driving in the UK, for example, but getting out into the middle of nowhere and having to fend for yourself is kind of what the Outback Trek does. So you got yourself into a position where you're doing a mini trek of your own.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And also, you mentioned that you had learnt to drive in an old Land Rover.
Yeah.
Did you actually work on that as well, or was it just sort of learning the ropes?
When you say work, do you mean as in
repairing it? Tinkering with it, repairing with it, and that kind of stuff.
I'd love to say that I did, and that I learned lots of technical mechanical skills from it, but I didn't at all. There was a guy who lived not too far from us who had a specialty, or his mechanical expertise were in old Land Rovers. Right. So we tended to send it that way when it inevitably broke down.
It's actually quite funny. I live on the northern beaches of Sydney, and in a car club where older Land Rovers are actually quite popular. And I think it's because they're relatively straightforward to work on. You can get the parts. But just that whole concept of getting it back on the road and making it work, I think, is quite fun. But it's a pity that you didn't, because I was actually going to ask you about the differences or similarities about mechanical work and being a doctor, because when you're working on a vehicle, you have to use a lot of your senses to be able to understand what's going on. So you'd listen to a vehicle and it doesn't sound right, or it smells wrong, or what I see doesn't look right. And I was going to sort of ask you a question about that, because that was something that, as a doctor, you've been trained to do triage, and you've been trained to know what potentially is going wrong, even though you might not be able to see it. There are other signs around that. So I was hoping to sort of get a feel of the the link between mechanical stuff and doctor stuff?
Well, it's, even though I can't really speak from a first-hand mechanical knowledge, it's actually a comparison that I have thought about on several occasions, most commonly when I've taken a car to the garage and you are in the hands of whoever you go to. If you don't have the background knowledge and expertise, when they look at what's going on and tell you what's going wrong and then tell you how much it's going to cost to fix it, you have to trust in their knowledge.
Yeah.
It's something that I actually have thought of on several occasions previously, that experience is a way to, as medical staff, we can forget sometimes about the perspective and experience of patients coming to see us, because we would understand the lingo and the implications of various tests and results, etc., and symptoms and signs if we were a patient or a relative was a patient. But going to a mechanic and having to, being almost clueless about what's really going on, and then having to accept the diagnosis, as it were, from your mechanic. It's a good perspective, a little reminder about how patients might often feel when they come and see us in hospital. So have some empathy.
Yes. Now let's have a chat about the Trek. On this year's Trek, you were a support medic. Is this a role that the organisers rotate, or do you think this is something that you could do for a few years at a time?
So it's very much a rotational exercise. It's, as you could probably imagine, quite a popular role to be awarded. So I was very, very lucky to get it this year. And there's nothing to stop me from applying to do it again, but it's highly likely that they would attempt to spread out the experience to other people. Yeah.
And what was it like for you getting on that Trek? You know, you've obviously had some experience out in the wild, as it were, and you've obviously, you know, as part of the Flying Doctor Service, have seen parts of Australia already. What was it like actually being on the Trek with the group?
Well, in short, it was actually fantastic. You won't be surprised to hear that I had a really excellent time. The whole event was amazing. And, you know, I was obviously, as you said there, in a professional capacity, but it's a very, very enjoyable environment and group of people, just first and foremost. But then the actual driving and the experience itself, I did get to drive for half the time, which was really great. And you, obviously, as you said, we get to go and see lots of the Australian wilderness in our job, but it is a really different perspective when you're driving the distances rather than flying it. You get a much more visceral sense for the distances and the remoteness of the locations when you are driving rather than jumping in a plane, flying 45 minutes to an hour, and simply arriving.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things that you mentioned also is that you wanted to head out to Julia Creek, and I wanted to give listeners, especially ones overseas, a perspective of where that is in the grand scheme of things. It's actually 3 hours drive north of Winton, where Qantas was founded, which is in turn over 14 hours drive from Brisbane. Can you describe what it was like when you were right out in the country, when, as you say, you've driven for several hours and there's potentially nothing out there? To you, what was that like, considering that you've come from an environment where there's a village every 5 minutes?
Well, the Australian outback is obviously, it's globally famous as a landscape, and it would be very much the case in the UK, where we have a romanticised and kind of Hollywood movie, in a way, mental image of the Australian outback. At least certainly I did. It's so famous and iconic. There were many moments when we were just driving slap bang in the middle of this kind of terrain that I just thought, this is unbelievable. You know, had a real change in the landscape, partly because of the flooding that had happened recently in Queensland, the enormous and really destructive flooding that had actually turned lots of it quite green. And then, of course, as we got up towards the North Queensland regions, it became more tropical. So you get this visible and noticeable change in the landscape from day to day, and even from the morning to the afternoon sometimes. So kind of part of your mental image might be that it's featureless and all looks the same, and it just doesn't. And you get sudden mountainous areas that come up out of nowhere. And as you say, it's a really stark thing. Once you get into the rural areas, we arrive at a town, spend the night there, and then you drive for an entire day, morning to evening, and all on dirt roads. And you have seen no other signs almost of civilization until out of nowhere you pop onto a tarmac road and you're in a town. But you drive from one end of the town to the next within 5 minutes. It's a really small, but they're really, really tight knit communities. And as you can imagine, those communities, because of their isolation in a lot of ways, are even more tight knit because of that. And we were welcomed just so fantastically everywhere we went, from the local communities putting us up with evening events, doing raffles, creating dinners for us. At one place, even the pub landlords kept the pub open until later. So however long you're going to stay for, we'll keep the pub open for, and then donated some wine to the officials on the trek. So, it was extraordinarily welcoming, and the trek generated quite a lot of fundraising money for the local regions as well, which is great.
And over the years, when I spoke to Matthew Tossolini in the first interview, talking about the millions of dollars raised for the Flying Doctor service that then gets plowed back into those services which are helping those communities, because I would think that they don't have an awful lot of local medical facilities, and they rely on you guys in planes and in some of the other equipment to be able to get out there and help them with a range of services.
Yeah, it's absolutely the case. It was one of the most striking things that I learned and was able to see early on working for the Flying Doctors. When you look at just the simple thought experiment of, if you were to take away the Flying Doctor service, what would a lot of the communities that we fly to on a daily basis, what would they be left with? And they really often don't have almost anything. And certainly if they become acutely, critically unwell, your options for getting them, when we work out of Broken Hill, for instance, you might be able to drive to Broken Hill in the region of 2 to 5 or 8 hours from wherever they are. And when you get to Broken Hill, they have a hospital there, yes. But if you have quite a lot of very serious medical illnesses, you need to get to Adelaide. And we can obviously cut down the time for doing that by an enormous amount. And that's just the emergency retrieval side of things, which is obviously what the Flying Doctors is kind of most famous for. But the vast majority of patient care is provided by the Flying Doctor GPs, the dental staff, the mental health care staff. There are breast cancer nurses. So the volume of care that is provided is, the majority of it is primary care, which actually is much more significant to a lot of people a lot of the time on a day-to-day basis. So it really is a huge thing for a lot of people living in rural places. And on the trek, you rarely spoke to a member of the community who didn't have a story about themselves, a relative, a friend who had been picked up in dire straits or helped out in some way.
I think that's one of the things that people don't realise, is that they have that view of the literally the flying doctor, and they've seen that on TV or they've seen it in advertising or mail outs that come through, but they don't realize that's just one small part of the service that the organization provides. And again, I remember back a few years at one of the agents, they were talking about the fleet of ambulances they had in some areas, and you've touched on mental health and you've touched on dental and things like that. So there's a huge amount of support and services available to different locations and communities. So when, for example, would a plane go out with a group of specialists on and hold a clinic out somewhere? Is that how they would do some of those? If they're not doing a retrieval, would you schedule regular visits to a community to do those other specific services?
Yes, yeah. So there is a set weekly rotation of clinics. So the frequency with which a plane of GPs and other specialists will fly out to communities is based upon the demand of each community. So places like, for instance, Wilkenya, around a 2-hour drive outside of Broken Hill. It's the largest rural population centre outside of Broken Hill in that area. So they have a clinic plane that flies out. I believe it's either 2 or 3 times a week from Broken Hill with RFDS. Whereas you might get other places like Tilpa, again outside of Broken Hill, with a smaller community, and they have a less frequent plane that flies out to them. But it's a set, regular clinic that gets scheduled where the plane flies out. So every day we'll have a plane flying out with a group of doctors and other specialists and nurses on board to go and provide regular, routine primary healthcare to the communities.
So from your perspective of being on the trek, is it safe to say that you were able to see a lot more of those communities on the ground and how they live because you've actually driven into them? You understand now the conditions that surround that community?
Yeah, absolutely. And you do get a fair look into that with work, but it's only enhanced for sure by going on the trek. And I think really getting that perspective of what it is to drive the distances that they would otherwise have to drive, or that they might routinely drive in order to go and do various things to simply live their lives, and getting a really good sense for the level of remoteness. And as I said before, the sense of community because of that is really pronounced. And we were really welcomed and looked after extremely well, and that speaks to their way of living, their values, and what sort of keeps the community alive.
Yeah. Well, were you in a main support vehicle, or did you have a specialized vehicle? What was the vehicle you had on the trek?
So we have got a couple of Toyota Land Cruisers that are Troopies, the 70 series, that are converted into ambulances. And there is one of those that we take on the trek each year. And then that's the vehicle that the doctor drives in with another co-driver, and who was George on my trip this year, which was great. And the other vehicle that the RFDS brings is I can't actually remember what it was. I think it was a Nissan, but another 4x4 with a big cab on the back to carry equipment, and that's the flight nurse goes in that. So we have 2 medical support vehicles, and we drive towards the back of the pack, one at the very back and one about a third the way forwards, so that hopefully if any accidents happen, we're already behind them driving towards the accident.
Yes. And I know that in talking to Matt and Josh recently, they had an old ambulance in their team that I think Josh's brother had. Were you tempted to jump in that at any time?
I jumped in it to have a look at it when they drove into Bathurst, because it was when it turned out, I had no idea it was coming, this absolutely enormous yellow ambulance that the sirens was put on and everything. So it turned up in style, and I had to have a look inside. So I got a good look around, and rather than a bank of medical equipment, I think they had a bar kitted out in the back. They'd done well with it.
I think that's one of the things about when talking to, the other folks over the other two interviews, is the types of vehicles and how they're kitted out. And there's a lot of very serious equipment on board, spares and other bits and pieces. But at the same time, they make it fun, and they do something to the vehicle that makes it unique, so that when you do get into a community, that it's a bit more entertaining for the locals when a bunch of strange people turn up in weird looking cars.
Yeah, absolutely. There were some very big head turners at the Trek. I would encourage anyone to go onto the Outback Trek website, and you can freely see all of the professional photography, because there's a couple of photographers on the Trek. So there's pictures of all of the cars, and it's well worth looking at, even if it's not something you're planning to sign up for yourself, because, as you say, some of the imagination that goes into the cars is fantastic. Yeah.
I know that you've done one, although in an official capacity. Would you see yourself at some stage in the future doing it personally?
That was probably my biggest overriding feeling from as a personal feeling from having done the Trek as the support vehicle. Doing it in a participant car would be something, and it would actually be something I'd really, really love to do with some friends from back home, because it's such a uniquely Australian experience. And a brilliant community, as I've mentioned, that it would be just a fantastic way to sit and long time catch up with friends that they haven't seen for a while giving them a really deeply Australian experience.
Now, I actually did an interview with one of I called him the pioneer of classic car rallies down here, and he'd organised, they're mostly tar-based rallies for classic cars, and he had his nephew come out a few years ago, and they did a run through the Blue Mountains and out into the plains, and it was the same for his nephew, not experiencing that type of countryside and ways of life and different things going on. So I think if you can encourage some of the guys to get on a plane and come out one year, and you get something organised, it would be such a rush to get it done, and lifelong memories afterwards.
Absolutely. And I've got a few friends that would definitely be up for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's in the pipeline.
Yeah. So the recommendation is go and have a look at the Outback Car Trek website. I've got that in the links of the podcast, and also links to the Flying Doctor service, because I do encourage people, if they are not going to get on board with the Car Trek, I could obviously donate to the Flying Doctor service, or even find a team locally that they could then sponsor for next year's event. And just get involved in some capacity, whether it's financial or offering a help to somebody along the way, even if it's helping prepare a car, because it is such an important event every year for the communities that the Flying Doctor service supports.
The even just the pure fundraising power of it is huge. It's the biggest Flying Doctor fundraising event every year, I believe, and I think it raised something like $19,000 for the local causes, and contributing approximately, I think, $75,000 a day to local economies that it drives through. So it really is a worthwhile thing to get involved with if you want to, or simply just a sport, as you say, in any way you can.
And for anybody heading out west and they're going near Dubbo, get up to the centre up in Dubbo, because I think some of the cars are up there on show, as well as some of the aircraft and bits and pieces. And that, again, gives you a good view of what actually happens with the Flying Doctor service and some of the efforts that people go to help keep the aircraft in the air and the vehicles on the ground, and people like yourself providing such an important service.
And indeed, there's also the visitor centre, with brand new visitor centre in Broken Hill. So again, if you're in that direction, which is really good. So both of them are really impressive facilities. I was quite impressed myself when I walked into the Dubbo one the first time, and pretty blown away by the size and scale of it, let alone how well put together it was.
Thank you, Guy. It's been great to catch up with you and talk about your experiences on the Outback Car Trek, and learning from somebody who was in a kind of an official capacity, but again, such an amazing experience to have, and to be able to get to see places and see people in the different environments. And I'm a great believer in encouraging anybody in a city to go out and look at the regional, and if they can get to remote parts of Australia, do so. It's such an eye-opener, and it gives you an appreciation of the size of the country, but also how other people live, because it is fundamentally different to the way that we live in major towns and cities. So thank you for your time today.
No problem at all. I couldn't agree more, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, pleasure, and well done, and keep up the good work.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Guy. Take care.
Cheers then.
It was great to chat with Dr. Hardwick and learn more about his experiences as part of the Outback Car Trek. As we discussed in episodes 170 and 172, the Outback Trek has been run 35 times since 1990, and it's raised over $37 million for the organisation, which is a great example of how communities can work together to improve lives. If you would like to donate or register for next year's Trek, head over to the web links in the podcast detail. Whatever you do will be appreciated by the communities in regional and remote Australia. Now, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast through your favourite player, whether it's Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible or Samsung, maybe even YouTube, and get the episodes delivered as they're published. You can also simply subscribe to the website motoringweekly.com.au, and you'll get notified when a new episode is published, and you can listen to all the episodes there if you don't use a podcast app. And from this week, we also have the podcast delivered through Mixcloud, which, like Spotify, was originally designed for music and now hosts radio programs and podcasts. If you like classic rock music, then once you've listened to Motoring Weekly, go find White Rabbit Radio, which is our sister radio program. So we do classic cars and classic rock. I'm Stephen Wells, and you've listened to Motoring Weekly, the podcast for the Australian historic road and racing community.